Hi, this is Adam from the classroom. In this video, we'll be talking about the basics of numbers. The first and most common type of number is the integer. We all started our education with the knowledge of the numbers 0, 1, 2, and 3. Then we learned that we can go further past 0 into the negatives. All of these numbers are considered as integers. Our second type of number is natural numbers. These exclude 0 and the negative numbers. They are considered as natural numbers because the numbers here are generally used for counting. Since you'd never start counting from a negative or 0, the first natural number is 1. Some more familiar numbers are odd and even numbers. Even numbers are integers that end with these numbers. Remember that all even numbers are in the table of 2. Odd numbers are integers that end with these numbers. Since even numbers are in the table of 2, odd numbers are not. Now onto the more fun numbers. We have squares and primes. Square numbers are numbers that make squares. Whenever you multiply a natural number with itself, you get a square number. We can relate this to finding the area of a square. We multiply the number of one side with itself. Here are the first 10 square numbers. Don't worry about memorizing them though. With enough practice with multiplication tables, you'll be able to draw on these first 10 very easily. It's important to visualize everything you can in mathematics, otherwise it'll make things unnecessarily challenging. Here you can see a visual representation of the first 4 square numbers, making their squares. Prime numbers are natural numbers that can only be divided by themselves and 1. Here are the first 5 prime numbers. When people see this, they often think it's wrong and that 1 is also a prime number. Knowing that a prime number needs to divide by itself and 1, each prime number can only be divided by 2 numbers. 1 can only be divided by itself, so it doesn't qualify as a prime number. Finding prime numbers can seem like an arduous task, but it doesn't have to be. The sieve of Eratosthenes is an easy way to find primes, but we'll get into that in another video. The last type of number we'll be looking at is the incomplete number. This can be written in 2 forms, as fractions or decimals. Consider a circle that's divided into 4 parts. Only one of these parts is filled. Since this shape is incomplete, we can note it down as 1 out of 4, or 1 over 4, commonly referred to as a quarter. So we can think of a fraction in 2 parts. The numerator, which is the number on top. This tells us the amount that is present. In this example, 1 out of 4 are present. And we have the denominator, which is the bottom number. This is the total amount, meaning that there can be 4 parts to this shape, 4 parts to this circle. It is a lot easier to remember these concepts if you have a good example to fall back on. If you understand this example, whenever you're confused about which number goes where, think back to this one and replicate the process. Now, if you use American coinage, you'll recognize that a quarter is 25 cents. So, where's the 25? We'll get into that next. Now, to get the decimal form, we need to divide. The question is, what do we divide? Looking at the division symbol, we can see that it is in fact an empty fraction, where the 2 dots represent the numerator and denominator respectively. So when we consider the previous fraction, 1 over 4, we can see that this means 1 divided by 4. Trying to divide 1 by 4 is a little bit complicated, because 1 is smaller than 4. So we need to add a decimal point in the answer section above. This allows us to put a 0 next to the 1, making it 10. Now that it's 10, the closest number in the table of 4 is 8, which is 4 times 2. So next to the decimal above, we add a 2, and we put an 8 below the 10, subtracting it to get a remainder of 2. Since our remainder is not 0, we have to continue. Now we arrive at the same problem that we had previously. The 1 was too small, and now the 2 is too small. So we need to add another 0 next to it. When we add the 0, it becomes 20, and we know that 20 can be found easily in the table of 4, by doing 4 times 5. Putting 5 up next to the 2 and throwing 20 down below, we can subtract to get a remainder of 0. So we get the final answer for 1 divided by 4 as 0.25. This means that a quarter can be written as 1 over 4 or 0.25. They both mean the same amount. If that division was a little too confusing, don't worry. We'll go deeper into that process in another video. Fractions and decimals can combine with integers very easily. Most often, you'll find them in this form. This example shows us what is called a mixed fraction, meaning that it has part of an incomplete number and part of a complete number. 1 plus a quarter gives us 1 1/4, which can also be read as 1 over 4, reading the integer first and then the fraction. The example on the right shows us the same thing, however, with a quarter in its decimal form. We see 1 plus 0.25 gives us 1.25. Often people read a number like this as 1.25. This is a common mistake. Reading it as 1.25 allows listeners to recognize that these are numbers after the decimal point. Now, remember that odd and even numbers are only integers, so fractions and decimals are neither odd nor even. So, knowing that a quarter can be 1 over 4 and 0.25, we can consider how to complete these incomplete numbers. Starting with the fraction, having filled in all the segments of our initial circle, we now have 4 out of 4 filled, giving us a fraction of 4 over 4. We know that this means 4 divided by 4, which when we resolve gives us 1, which tells us that this is one whole shape, or rather one whole number. So returning to American coinage, knowing that 4 quarters makes $1, we can also see that 4 quarters makes a whole. Now we can resolve this in a similar way with 0.25. If we add 0.25 to itself 4 times, we get 1.00. Now this is a bit confusing because it says 1.00, but it's still a whole number. This is because after the decimal place, there are no significant figures, meaning there are no digits other than 0 after the decimal place, which means that they can be ignored completely and we're left with our one whole number. Okay, let's look at some questions to see if we can recognize the numbers that we just learned about. Let's look at this list and find out which of the following are integers. You can pause here and do it for yourself, and you can continue when you're ready. All done? Great. We know that integers are any and all whole numbers, so we can remove any of the incomplete numbers, so no fractions or decimals. Now we have our list of integers. We're going to be following a similar structure moving forward, so as soon as you see the type of number it's asking for, pause, take a minute, answer it for yourself, and continue. Now we're looking at natural numbers. Alright, so we know that natural numbers are numbers that we use for counting. So we remove incomplete numbers, we remove negatives, and we remove 0, and we are left with our natural numbers. Now let's look at odd numbers. We know that odd numbers are integers that end with 1, 3, 5, 7, or 9. So, using this, we can find our odd numbers, which are 1, 3, and 9. Now we're looking at even numbers. We know that even numbers are integers that end with 0, 2, 4, 6, or 8. So, following a similar system to what we did previously, we find that our even numbers are -8, 0, 2, and 16. Now for prime numbers. We know that prime numbers are natural numbers that can only be divided by themselves and 1. Since we haven't covered the sieve of Eratosthenes, we can just use the list that we got from the previous slide. This tells us that 2 and 3 are the only prime numbers in this list. Now for square numbers. We know square numbers are found by multiplying a natural number with itself. So again, based on the list we used previously, or you could try this yourself, we know that 1, 9, and 16 are the square numbers in this list. We're almost done. Next up is fractions. We know what a fraction looks like. It is a number over another number. So, just by looking at the list, we can see that two numbers stand out. 4 1 over 2 and 5 5 over 7 are our fractions. Finally, we're looking at decimals. We know decimals are incomplete numbers that have a decimal point. We know what the point looks like. We can see it very clearly in the list. We have 1.3 and 16.44 as our decimals. Alright, so that wraps it up. Here's a summary with some examples for you to note down so you always know the difference between these different numbers. You can find a link in the description to get a picture of this from my Patreon. So moving forward, we'll be going deeper into different operations: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, after covering the basics of place values. Then we'll look at rounding off and comparing numbers before going deeper into other concepts just hinted at in this video. Thank you for watching, and I hope this video was of help to you. Take care, and I'll see you next time in the classroom.